Good afternoon, viewers. I'm Shankar Kumar, and today, as we sit across, we are discussing a very interesting topic that covers the interwar period, and we would be talking of the situation in Europe, the way it unfolded during the two iconic world wars, World War I and World War II. I hope you know about the timelines of the two world wars. 1914 to 1919 is the First World War. 1939 to say 1945 is the period of the Second World War, and roughly 30 years that separates the start and end of the start of the First World War and the end of the Second World War is what we are talking about. And therefore, this particular discussion is not about the individual events and country-wise alliances and so forth that mark the First World War or the Second World War or preparation towards wars and so forth. Rather, this is about the big picture of the interwar period. This is about the continental Europe, the way it transformed, or the way it refused to be what it was all through the 19th and early decades of the 20th century in between the two periods. In fact, this period has received a lot of attention by several scholars, historians, and even philosophers who have sought to understand as to what these two wars did to humanity, what these two wars did to history of Europe. And therefore, before we begin any event-wise elaboration of things or processes, it's very important to understand the backdrop. When we say that these 30 years transformed Europe, we should understand as to what we are talking about. Unless we have a good grip over what typified 19th century Europe, we perhaps wouldn't quite be able to understand the gravity of what we are trying to understand through some kind of an assessment of this period. And therefore, what I would like you, the students, to understand is that 19th century Europe, in terms of polities, in terms of transformational period, is about three basic things. At the intellectual level, you have three basic ideas. They are all emanating from the writings of the Enlightenment scholars, all right, but ever since the unfolding of the French Revolution in Europe, and of course some kind of ripple effect of what had happened in the American War of Independence as well, monarchies were giving way to nation states, and these nation states were premised on ethnic groups. The idea of nationalism, the idea of nationhood, nation states, etc., were written profusely by Enlightenment scholars, and the citizenship of this nationhood or this citizenship under a particular nation or according sovereignty to nation. When we say sovereignty to nation, what it means is that there is no other agency, there is no other you can say social formation, or there is no other historical entity that enjoyed this bestowing of sovereignty. For example, a family was not sovereign, an individual was not sovereign, a province was not sovereign, a dynasty was not sovereign. But what was sovereign was the nation. Constitutionally, that's how it unfolded all through the 19th century, right? So these were some of the new things that typified Europe. Similarly, you have at the intellectual level, you have also the idea of socialism, the idea of individualism, pervading greater part of Europe as we progress from say 1800 to 1900, and even thereafter the process continues till date, right? So what we need to understand here is that be it nationalism, be it emergence of entities like nation states as sovereign units, be it liberalism that underpinned polities that carried forward the capitalist ethos, the capitalist spirit, right? Be it particularly from the second half of the 19th century, increasing momentum of socialism as an idea that can give a different kind of politics or different kind of polity as compared to the liberal democratic regimes represented through parliaments and governed through constitutions and so forth. We have Karl Marx, Engels and so forth, who are arguing of a different model altogether, and that also actually fructifies when we look at the Bolshevik revolution in the interwar period, right? So with this backdrop, I think we can have a reasonably good account of what was at stake and what was transforming and what was completely, you can say, dismantled during this period of 30 years, which we understand as the interwar period. So that is a primer to this topic, Europe between the two world wars. Now, the photograph that you can see on your screen is just to give you a sense of the problems, of the dislocations, of the privations that these wars actually are carried through in the imagery of people till date, right? So it came at a cost of a colossal number of human lives and dislocations, not only in terms of geography but also in terms of memories and fractured memories and very bitter memories, at times loss of faith in individualism, loss of faith in the political systems that had anchored European history all through the past 19th century, right? And those are the things that we would constantly be coming back to. So just keep this picture in mind whenever we talk of the human loss or problems associated with or enormous cost that this war actually gave to humanity, right? Okay. Now, on your screen, you can see I have quoted the American historian Charles Mayer, and it has been said how Woodrow Wilson, the US president, and Lenin at this time were offering different yet new ways of perceiving the modern state system. So what are we talking about? We are talking about the 20th century. We are talking of the Treaty of Versailles, with which most of you are aware of. Post the First World War, we all know that Britain and France emerged victorious while Germany was the vanquished power, and this is school book stuff, that the Treaty of Versailles was signed and the pressure or the obligations on Germany as the vanquished power was enormous, perhaps unjust as well, right? And at this point of time in the Treaty of Versailles, the world leaders who actually were brokering the deal, you also have the US President Woodrow Wilson. Lenin is not in picture at Versailles, but he is offering an alternative, and he is offering an alternative to the world order, right? Post the Bolshevik Revolution in 1917, he is also offering an alternative to the capitalist world order. So what we are placing at stake immediately after the First World War is two grand visions of polity, two grand visions for the future of humanity, right? This is new ways of perceiving things. This is new ways of understanding modern state system. So, in effect, Wilson or Lenin both were making global statements in 20th century. There is an element of reaching or breaching the national frontiers and think of some international order, right? Because it was somehow believed that it is the rupture of this internationalism that should have been looked into simultaneously when nationalism was encompassing greater part of Europe all through the 19th century. Somehow it was felt that all through the Bismarckian foreign policy of checks and balance and preempting a particular invading country or enemy country by occupying a particular piece of land, and then that imperial push to create more and more colonies, because industrialization is also happening and bringing more and more parts of Europe under its fold. So, under all these compulsions, somehow the cooperation, the coordination between different nationalities, between different nation states, perhaps could have become a casualty leading to the First World War, and Wilson and Lenin are responding to this as statesmen. So these offerings are, of course, statesmanly. Now, one can take one's pick, like whether you subscribe to capitalist order or you subscribe to socialist order, but at this point of time, say in 1919, 1920s, both offered a perspective of future, right? So, moving on, we all know what capitalist system is all about, what liberal democratic regimes are all about, although a majority of them had actually to be blamed, because most of these nations that came to war with each other were democratic representative nations, right? And the 1920s, the history of the 1920s is essentially in Europe about the wounds that capitalist order was licking all through. And when it came to the 1929 World Economic Depression and the consequences that followed, definitely the representative democratic liberal regimes appeared to be very feeble and very inappropriate to deal with the emerging situation. Even in the countries that had emerged as victorious, say in Britain or in France, they had tough time. Not to say of Italy and Germany. All of us know that the democratic regimes over there couldn't quite last for more than a decade immediately after the war, and gave way to emergence of totalitarian regimes typified by fascism in Italy, Nazism in Germany, and also Bolshevism under Stalin in Russia, right? So, what is Lenin at this moment saying? Lenin's assertion is a radical cry to overturn the old state system through world revolution. We all know what socialism is, what Marxism is, and what communism is, right? So, he is also calling for the self-determination of non-European peoples, and that's where statesmanship comes in, right? So, he is not only confined to his nation or his USSR and so forth. He's talking of a kind of political system, of processes that had impacted people even outside his country. So he is calling for self-determination of non-European peoples, which enlarged his internationalist program and also questioned the foundations of the Westphalia system. This is what I was telling you about, that the liberal democratic regimes and the ethos and the principles governing it were questioned, because it was proven to the world that they couldn't quite cooperate with each other, and the world was thrown into a situation which only resulted in a world war. And even after the World War, after the First World War, they couldn't quite resolve it. And subsequently, in another part of the lecture, we will talk about it as to how Hobsbawm refers to this period as a 30 years war, because he thinks that First World War couldn't quite resolve the issues for which it was fought, and it took Europe another 30 years and engage in the Second World War to actually arrive at some kind of a solution. And that solution also led to the Cold War era and so forth, right? So Lenin's assertion is also questioning the foundations of the Westphalia system, which had privileged the power of Europe over others. So imperialism or colonialism, the way you see it, which side you are in. So some kind of a support is given by Lenin to the anti-imperialist struggles in various colonies. I'm just bombarding you with some statistics that will put things in perspective, and I will elaborate this in the second part of the lecture, which is a sequel to it, right? So if you look at the big picture, and we are trying to gauge the impact of the First World War or the transformation that Europe is undergoing in the interwar period, right? So Europe between the two world wars had a total of 28 states. There are 28 sovereign states. In 1920, that is immediately after the First World War, except two, all of these 28 states, that is 26, were democracies. And when we say democracies in that situation, think of a parliamentary system with elected governments, an array of political parties, and guaranteed individual rights. Okay, so this is the basic minimum definition with which democratic regimes of all kinds were working in Europe at around 1920. So a majority of them, 26 states, are democratic states immediately after the First World War. Now, leapfrog to 1938. 1938 means just as the cusp of the beginning or cusp of the Second World War. Of the 26, we find that 16 of them had succumbed to dictatorship. That tells you the story. When we say dictatorship, what is it that we mean? The leaders are not elected or not elected through representative institutions, but leaders possessing absolute power beyond the constraint of whatever constitution that they had given to themselves, or beyond the dictates of the elections, right? So when you think of Hitler, when you think of Mussolini, when you think of Stalin, well, that tells you the story. And that is the turbulence, that is the rupture power of the First World War, or these 2-3 decades separating the two wars. USSR and Hungary emerged as the leftist powers, while the other 14 were rightist dictatorship. So even within dictatorship, it's not as if only right-wing politics led to dictatorial regimes, but even left-wing politics led to emergence of totalitarian regimes. So I'm just giving you the broad canvas, broad political canvas to make a sense of this. We'll be elaborating it in the next part of the lecture. 1938, 12 democracies. Right. So in 1938, you have 12 democracies, but as you progress into the Second World War, 7 of these were torn apart between 1939 to 1940. Immediately at the start of the Second World War, of the 12 democracies, 7 were gone. Right? That's again that's what emphasizes the rupture power, the phenomena of of dismantling things, right? And by 1940, you have only 5 democracies left in Europe that remained intact: UK, Ireland, Sweden, Finland, and Switzerland, right? So, having taken a stock of the kinds of polities, let's try and understand as to what are the kinds of dictatorships that we have. Now, you have dictatorships of the proletariat, which is a temporary phase in which the principles of communism would be applied. In Russia, Lenin established the Bolshevik regime in October 1917 after the overthrow by force of the semi-liberal provisional government, which had disposed of the Tsarist empire in March. But subsequent to that, so far it was fine, it was a kind of alternative, but Lenin's temporary dictatorship was given a permanent base by Stalin, and that's where the totalitarian aspect of left politics all the more makes itself visible. And Stalin, who came to power in 1924, represents that. Hungary underwent a communist revolution in 1919 as Bela Kun tried to repeat the Bolshevik achievement in Hungary. It could only last for 133 days and eventually fell to the counter-revolutionary forces. So look at the forces of anomie, normlessness in terms of kinds of polities. All other attempts in the 1920s and 1930s to establish leftist dictatorships didn't quite meet with success. Even in Germany, it was tried, but somehow it didn't quite succeed. Dictatorships from the right of the political spectrum, so right-wing dictatorships that you get to see, which is also referred to as revolutionary totalitarianism. In 1922, all of us know, Mussolini set the pattern for a number of other leaders by assuming control of Italy, that we understand as fascism. And inspired by that, you have 1933, Hitler appointed as chancellor in Germany, inaugurating a ruthless regime that we understand as the Nazi Third Reich, right? Despite being rivals for control over Central Europe, Italy and Germany forged a working diplomatic partnership known as Rome-Berlin Axis, and this undermined the remaining democracies on one hand and checkmated the Soviet Russia on the other. Conservative authoritarian regimes, 1920 you have Horthy establishing control over Hungary. 1926 you have Piłsudski ruling over Poland. 1932 Austria moved to the right, that is right-wing polity under Dollfuss, and then till 1934, that was under this conservative authoritarianism, till it got absorbed under Germany. 1926, Lithuania fell to Semota, and 1934, Latvia fell to Ulmanis. So that tells you the story of the range of dictatorships, left and right, that we have, and interspersed you have tottering centrist representative democratic regimes, and we will be talking about it as to what happened to them in next part of the lecture. Thank you.